No, it's great to see people trickling through there. So I think we'll kick off Colm this morning. You're all very welcome to our webinar. And as people come in, they'll get the gist of what's going to happen this morning. My name is Caroline Kinsella, Head of Business Development for Open Programs in Smurfit Executive Development. I'm delighted to welcome you to the first of our virtual Open Week webinars. Very happy and delighted to be joined with Colm Murphy today. So he's the head of coaching programs, so is involved across our open portfolio and working directly with businesses in our customized programs, both accredited and non-accredited. So a great double act this morning, if I do say so myself, Colm. We will provide you with a brief overview of our flagship coaching program, the Diploma in Business and Executive Coaching, at the end. But rest assured, our team will send out any further details that you might like if you're thinking about taking on a program at this time. We have an intake happening in March, but more about that later on. As I said, for those that joined at the very, very start, we would like to make this very informative, interactive, dynamic. So Colm would like you to have a pen and paper at hand. So please scoot off now if you need to get something to scribble some notes on. But this program is, or this webinar I should say, is also recorded. So we can play it back later on and you can share it with colleagues and friends alike. So I will wrap up now. Colm, I'll hand over to you, and I hope everybody enjoys the session this morning.
Thanks, Caroline. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're all keeping well on this bright and fresh Monday morning. My name is Colm Murphy, and we're going to talk for the next hour or so about burnout and how having coaching conversations can enable people to get back into that well-being and sustainable performance area. And really the lens is whether I'm a manager of a team, a colleague of somebody, a friend, how do I go about having a coaching conversation with somebody that may help them just find their way out of those signs of burnout that many of us have experienced over the last couple of years, especially in the context of COVID. So this will be really interactive. As Caroline mentioned, would love you to share your thoughts, your reflections, your questions, your insults, your observations on chat, and we'll make this a very interactive hour. Brief introduction from me. As Caroline mentioned, I'm the head of coaching programs here at Smurfit Executive Development. I've been running my own coaching company for 13 years and working with leaders and teams and managers from lots of different sectors, and also had a past history as a director in a global tech company. And yeah, what I want to share with you today is just some of my experiences in having some coaching conversations with some of my clients, and also to blend in some of the material that we use in our coaching programs to help people actually go about having these conversations. And again, it's not the aim to make you all coaches. As a manager, leader, colleague, friend, how do we find a way of making the space to help people become more aware of what might be going on that leads to them feeling burnt out? So here's the agenda for the next hour. I'm going to use two cases, person A and person B, throughout this webinar, just to give us a flavor of some real life scenarios. We're going to look at some definitions. What do we mean by burnout? What do we mean by coaching conversation? We're going to go into this concept of the inner and outer landscape as a really powerful model that we teach in our programs. That means that when we have coaching conversations, they're not just transactional, they are really helping someone get some deep awareness to maybe change some key patterns of behaviors. We're also going to ask the question, well, how can we be useful? With our skill set, with our abilities, how can we be useful as opposed to being helping somebody? I'm going to talk to you about how they're different. We'll also talk about how do people change. Coaching is very much a tango. It's two people. Where does someone need to be for us to be able to help them maybe recognize the signs of burnout and help them make some changes? And I also want to spend the last bit of time reflecting on, it's not just individuals. So much of what we do in our organizations is reliant on teams. And maybe that question, can teams be burnt out as well? And what might be some of the factors that creates that experience? And then we'll save some time to hear your reflections and any questions. And Caroline will keep an eye on chat. So if anything comes up for you and you want to ask or reflect upon, please put it in straight away and we'll keep going back and forth to the chat function. And then we'll share a bit more about some of our programs just to give you a feel for what we have on offer. As Caroline's already mentioned, we just have 2 asks. It'd be great to have a pen and paper just to help you capture your own reflections, as maybe we share some ideas or models with you that might land for you or someone in your world. And again, please do use chat to share your thoughts, your experiences, and your questions. Okay, so let's get into the conversation. And to get us in there, I want to introduce 2 people to you. First person A, is someone I've started to work with in the kind of the later months of last year. Person A is an experienced senior manager of a technical project team. So this team does lots of big technical projects for an organization. And when he first approached me about some coaching support, very much the language he used was, "I've lost my mojo." He talked about experiencing a loss of focus and hunger. There has been a key part of this contextually is that he's noticed this loss really happening over over 2021, and something about COVID and working from home has disrupted some of his patterns that have enabled him in the past to feel very effective and achieve a lot of career development and advancement. There's a real worry for him about letting his team and his colleagues down. He's quite anxious about that. And something I'll come back to in a little while, which became very pertinent as I tried to figure out how could I be useful, is that this individual is a dedicated runner, is someone who's run marathons throughout his life, does a lot of running. And even knowing that just gave me a possible clue about how he might be able to find a way through what he's currently experiencing. So that's person A. I'd also like to introduce person B, who's in a slightly different space. I mean, A, when I see that loss of mojo, loss of focus and hunger, probably is more in that burnout space at the moment. Person B, I think in working with them, there's the possibility that they may end up in that space. They are a director in a global company. For those of us who've worked in global companies, they face the classic matrix challenge of a boss in the US and a dotted line boss in Ireland. They've just been given added responsibility. Interesting enough, their boss in the US left the organization. And again, like many of us in all different parts of life, we end up getting more responsibility and almost ending up doing 2 jobs. So the old job hasn't gone away. She's still doing that. And now she has a lot of the responsibilities that her old boss in the US used to do, as well as a new boss now in the US. And I guess her profile and reputation in her organization was very much known as, incredibly clever, safe pair of hands, known as a doer, very hard work ethic. But part of the reason the coaching began was there was a perception of person B not always being great at bringing people with her. And again, they're meeting us in different places. A, I think, is experiencing burnout, that loss of mojo, very self-critical voice, is really feeling like he's letting people down and doesn't know how to get out of that funk that he's in. Whereas person B, not there yet, but based on their past patterns of behavior and based on the added responsibility and the pressure, there's a potential they may end up feeling a bit overwhelmed if they don't pay attention to what's going on. So we'll come back to these 2 individuals throughout, and we'll be looking for your thoughts about how could we help them maybe deal with some of the pressures they're feeling. And I hope by their very nature, they may well resonate with you or some of your colleagues or your team members. So there's a question I want to maybe get you to think about in chat, and Caroline will keep an eye on what's coming up there. But as you look at A and B, and you might even put your answers and then put in brackets A or B so we know who you're talking about, how would you help either or both these people? Let's say you are their manager or one of their colleagues. And again, they are in different places. Can you just go to the chat function and let us know what is coming up? So Sean is already signaling that this sounds familiar as we describe these people, but what would be your instinct for either A or B about how you would go about helping them based on what I've shared so far? This is a chance to exercise your fingers. Your Fitbit might even recognize your finger use, so you might get some calories out of this. Hannah, lovely question there for A or B is what does good look like? Yeah, interesting, Hannah. And maybe even what does good look like for whom? The organization maybe describing one version of good. I wonder what the person might see good as. Great, thank you for that. Karen is talking about, part of helping them is maybe empathizing with them both. And empathy is a key part of us having these conversations. There's a really interesting idea of empathy versus maybe colluding with them as well, or sympathy. There's a lovely story of a person falls down a well, and sympathy is you walk past, you see them, and you jump down into the well with them. And now you're both in the well. So there's lots of sympathy there. Whereas empathy is almost, I can hear what you're saying. I could imagine it feels tough or challenging, but I'll stay above ground, above the well, so I can be of more use to you. So how can we empathize with them? What else are we saying? Sean talking about help them step back and get some perspective. Very good. Let me think what else is going on. Mark talking about for person A might need more one-to-one engagement and personal contact. Yeah, I'm wondering maybe where their boss is. And what's interesting as person A is their boss has just moved to a new role and they're waiting for a new boss to come in. So maybe who is that person that could help them in that conversation? What else are we seeing? Anya, a feeling of lost mojo. Can he attend the office maybe a day, a week, or a fortnight to try and reconnect? Really interesting idea, and interesting you picked up on that, Anya, because there is something about person A lives on their own, and there is something about even the commute. There's a real sense of mourning about the commute in every day, where it used to be a very dedicated pattern of what he'd do in the train to get ready for the day. So I think that's really insightful of you to think about, is there some new patterns he could create? Let me just do a few more. Margarita talking about asking person B what is her perception of things. Yeah, so not assuming they're going to move to burnout, but getting their sense of things. Maybe Lynn talking about A, can he take some time off? Okay, Sinead talking about it's all about starting with a listening ear. That's a lovely phrase, Sinead. So give them the space to talk through the issues and before bringing solutions. And again, will they even be able to talk through those issues? Because some of us do a very good job of denying, and we'll come back to that. Okay, lots of great ideas. I'm going to keep going. Thank you very much for that. We really appreciate it, and we'll be coming back to chat in a little while. So let me just define some of the concepts we're talking about. The first one I want to define is the idea of burnout, and here's the definition from the World Health Organization. And 2019 was a point where they began to recognize it as something more significant than maybe it had been defined in the past. So chronic workplace stress, characterized by 3 dimensions. And definitely what we see with person A is that losing of energy depletion. Not for B at all yet, but A is definitely in that energy depletion space. And I don't know about many of you, but I could relate to that even in the last few months. And that's one of the reasons I picked this topic. Was I noticed in myself and more in my coaching work, this becoming a theme as we came up to Christmas break. And you might think, well, that's always maybe there to a degree, but for many of us, it felt very different and had a longer tail. It wasn't just coming into December, almost a sense from September onwards, feeling that. And how do I start this new year, maybe managing my energy levels? This idea of another factor dimension is there's a mental distance from one's job or feeling of negativity or cynicism. Again, does person A feel that there's anxiety? I think maybe the negativity is towards themselves as opposed to job, but a sense of not feeling they can do one's job. And this idea of efficacy. So self-efficacy is a key idea. Self-belief is my belief that about my own qualities. Self-efficacy is the idea that I can do what's required. The work is required. And A is definitely suffering from that. And again, I share it with you, B, because she is not necessarily feeling any of these, but there might be a sense of, based on her ingrained pattern of do more, work harder, do it on her own, that there might be some early warning signs, especially with this job and now these added responsibilities, that it may have a risk of becoming quite overwhelming. And what the WHO talk about is burnout refers to an occupational context. So just talking with Caroline before we started today, and we were talking about, well, what about as parents? We can often feel burnout in other aspects of our lives, but today we're going to very much focus on that organizational side of things. What we're also just seeing is another element of this from a professor in Northwestern University, Dr. Chang, who talks about burnout is conditioned as caused by an individual's work, and their relationship to their work may lead to this. So that's a really interesting idea for us to think about, is it's me and it's my work, but it's the relationship between the two. And for both A and B, there has been an important relationship in the past between them and their work, as it is for many of us. It's been a source of career advancement, of recognition, a sense of achievement. And sometimes that relationship can get muddied or become unclear. And that maybe is at the core source of when we do feel a bit burnt out and overwhelmed. On the other hand, let's look at what do I mean by a coaching conversation. And so an interesting definition by Professor David Clutterbuck: it's a conversation that allows a person to develop greater awareness. And I've bolded that because I'm going to come back to that later on. I think it's one of the ways we can be really useful. And that listening ear that was mentioned is, how do we help someone become aware? I can't change anybody. I can barely change myself. But how do we raise awareness with the person? And not just any old awareness, but awareness of their internal and external context. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a second as well, to integrate those worlds together. That supports them making better decisions, better self-management. So already, and a key part of what we do on our coaching programs is not just staying on the outer external context, which is quite compelling at times, but having the confidence and the curiosity to invite the other person into what might be in your internal context. What I would add then to David's definition is what is at the heart of this? For me, coaching, whether it's big C, so working formally with a coach, or something that's quite formal in your one-to-ones with your team or your boss, or it could be small C, the ability to have one of these conversations informally. They just arise, the chance to pause and actually not jump in and give the answer, but to take a different perspective. I think whether it's big C or small C, coaching conversations about expanding a person's perspective, helping them see it from another view. How do we help A see it from maybe how their colleagues see things, or how they themselves see it, what's going on, or family members. So how do you expand how I see this? There's something about, again, this idea of increasing their awareness, because the more aware I am, the more options I have. And that can often be one of the most empowering pieces of the work we do in holding that space for a colleague, a friend, a team member, is helping them realize they've got some options here and that they're the best person to decide what those options are. The coaching conversation is through a learning partnership. So there is something about, how do I make the learning, the holding and the exchange safe? And that's often through the listening and the use of questions, and making sure I'm not judging, because if I feel like you're judging me, I'm going to close down. And also to resist the temptation of fixing, which is strong in all of us. I would say everybody on this webinar, we are successful because we solve problems. And that may be a core part of our job, is we solve problems for people. And it is something about, in helping a coaching conversation to work, is to remove that desire to go with the answer and the solution. It might be something we offer at some point, but how do we let the person figure things out themselves? And the hope is, in a coaching conversation, it results not always in an answer, but maybe greater clarity, and also maybe a sense of accountability. It's in my hands. So for A and B, it's not something I'm going to do to them. It's about, in their own gift, what might they want to change in their patterns or in their practices that will give them an opportunity to be effective, and that sense of ownership as well, and action. So there's our definitions. We're going to work through the idea of burnout that happens, and the idea that a coaching conversation is a space It's not every conversation you need to have in your work life. There is a time to tell. So as a manager, I might need to tell somebody something or be very directive. There might be a time where I need to really move the pace. It's time for me to be visionary. But I would imagine even this week coming up, is there one conversation out there that maybe you could hold differently and really engage the person and make the space for them to be listened to ask them questions and help them get some clarity, whether it's around feeling overwhelmed or how to make a decision or working on a project or next steps. There's an opportunity for us to slow down and do something different. So David Clutterbuck mentioned this idea of internal and external context. So let's talk more about that, because it becomes really pertinent in my mind to us understanding how burnout occurs. And it also became very pertinent to the work I did in trying to be useful with person A and B. So when we think about performance, we can look at it in two aspects, and that's probably a false dichotomy that, this is all one thing. But if we did separate them, there's very much an external landscape going on. I think about my performance in work, in Smurfit Executive Development, even my performance on a tennis court. There's all these outer external landscape issues. There's the role I've been asked to do. There's the relationships I have with colleagues. There's other people I have to work with. There's deadlines. There's the culture. There's the job description, there's expectations, there's maybe even the locations. If I was thinking about playing tennis tonight, there's going to be, the weather, the quality of the court, my opponent, the net, the quality of the tennis balls, the racket, all those external things that are very relevant. But when we look at any level of performance, it's never just external. I think, focusing on the external is often useful to a point, but it maybe misses a whole part of the conversation. And my encouragement is, as managers, as colleagues, as friends of people, how do we just help them get curious? We're not going to dive in there and get into therapy, but how do we invite them or get curious about what else might be going on inside? And this internal landscape, what's in there? It's often the world of emotions and feelings. And again, person A is very much feeling de-energized, is feeling bad about themselves. It's the world of assumptions, things I've experienced in the past that I now believe are the rule, even though that may not be so. It's that sense of self-efficacy and maybe past experiences. It's voices. So that critical voice that many of us, if not all of us, carry around with us, that speaks often very loudly and challenges us in terms of, are you good enough? Are you going to be successful? Do they like you? There's also all these ideas of we've learned sometimes to avoid these anxieties by coming up with some psychological defenses. So how do I not commit myself to being too good at the fear of failure? How do I avoid feeling that shame? Lots of different defense mechanisms. It's the world of values and desires. So it's not all negative. And drivers. So again, career drivers and advancement are going on for A and B. And if you go back to the very simple example of me playing tennis tonight, what's the inner landscape for me? It's going to be that voice. So as I go for my second serve, I can already hear the voice saying, you're going to double fault, or you're not playing well tonight, or they're much better than you, or, it might be a voice with lots of instructions to me. And so often in tennis, for example, at my very basic level, the biggest opponent I face is between my ears, never mind the person on the other side of the court. And so recognizing that when it comes to performance, both of these landscapes need to somehow be acknowledged and aligned. And my understanding of burnout is when the awareness of both these worlds starts to really separate. So I don't, for some reason, fully have awareness about how much is being asked of me in my external world and the pressure that's creating. I've almost numbed myself to that, or it's part of the culture just to accept it and get on with it. But the less aware I am of those external pressures and the less aware I am of some of those internal drivers that might keep me taking on those pressures, that's the gapping that burnout exists in. So what do I mean by that? Well, if I go back to person A, he's experiencing burnout. Absolutely, there's an outer external landscape, one of huge deadlines. His team has a number of really large projects going on. There's expectations that he has of himself, but of his stakeholders. There's probably a corporate culture of, I would say, quite a cognitive culture of it's all here and just get on with it. What's really interesting for me is he doesn't talk a lot about colleagues and relationships. It feels like it's all on him at the moment. And when he talks about his role is a combination of doing some of this work himself, but also troubleshooting where are these various projects. And again, part of what he's experiencing is he doesn't feel he can do his role virtually because something's going on that he doesn't feel like he's quite as in control as he would normally be around his role. And what else is person A experiencing? Well, he's experiencing a critical voice. There's a voice there saying, you're not good enough. This is below par. And it was interesting. His boss, as I mentioned, had moved job, but I got a chance to speak to that ex-boss and to person A. And the boss was less clear that performance had suffered, whereas person A was convinced it had. So again, that voice is feeding it. This isn't good enough, even though others may not be seeing it. The emotions and feelings of A are very much around, I've lost my mojo, I've lost my feelings, I don't have that get up and go. So he's feeling lethargic, he's feeling bad about himself, and his self-efficacy is suffering. That sense of, I can do this, even though he's got a huge track record of success, that's really being impacted. And there's a bunch of assumptions going on. And the other thing I want to call out, and I mentioned his running, because it was one of the ways I think that we got to kind of explore what might change the dialogue here was when I became aware that he was quite a dedicated runner. There was something about exploring with him what was behind that experience. And we came into things like discipline and a routine, and recognizing that you can run a race and it won't always go well, but it gets you ready for the next race. And so some of the work I did was to really work with that image of if you were running, what could you bring from that world into this experience right now? And so as somebody mentioned, the idea of forming new practices. So why not try and get into the office once or twice a week and relive that practice of what he was doing there, or changing his routine in the morning, or even he was noticing that he wasn't getting out to exercise as much. So part of that energy depletion was he was kind of getting anxious about the work and almost staying inside too much. So these were some of the things, and the work that I think was helpful was inviting him to be curious about not just the external landscape, but also the internal, and becoming more aware of both of those, maybe challenging how they work together. Let me just show you person B, and then we might stop and see what questions or thoughts or reflections you have. And as you listen to this, I'm wondering what's in your internal landscape when it comes to work and workload and doing work. I know for myself, pleasing people is a huge part of my internal landscape, and it can mean often saying yes, even when I don't have bandwidth. And that can create the conditions for burnout, wanting to please, wanting to be liked. It's different for everybody. So what is it for you? What's going on in your external landscape and your internal landscape that might be a factor in sometimes you feeling overwhelmed? Or what might it be for one of your colleagues or team members? Person B, as we mentioned, is in a slightly different space. They're not experiencing burnout yet, but there is something about past patterns where they take on more and more. So again, let's look at their external world. It's slightly different actually than A. There's still colleagues and relationships. Again, interesting enough, person B doesn't really talk about that aspect too much. There can be a sense of being a lone wolf, but events have triggered something. Her boss in the US has left the business and she's taken on a lot of his role. And that word role, one of our interesting conversations, I noticed when we were talking about this new role, she kept on describing it as his role. So for argument's sake, say Colm's role, and doing Colm's role. And we began to say, well, actually, what's it like to call it your role? Do you have to do it the way he did it. And that fed into some of the expectations that she was almost having to pretend to be him and do it his way, as well as do the other job. So she's already got 2 jobs, and now she has to do one of them in a way that isn't her. So again, how do we listen for these words and just pay attention to them and raise awareness? She wasn't aware she was saying his role all the time. And that curiosity about what would it look like if you called it your role. But below the surface, we got into some interesting conversations. And there is a driver. The driver is about career advancement and being successful. It's healthy, but might lead to not looking for any support or doing this on our own. One of the big things, though, was around a value and a set of assumptions. One of her key challenges is not being able to delegate. So she's doing all this extra work, high pressure, very visible. And one of our conversations was about one way out of this is, how do you get your team to do more? I'm sure it's a very common conversation for you all. How do I get my team to do more? And yet it was interesting when we spoke about that, there was a real visual reaction to like, oh, delegation. It was a yucky expression on her face. And what that was around was her own past experience and values of being independent. It was something, part of her psychological defenses growing up in her household. It was all about, I have to be independent because of some dynamics going on. And so this idea of me delegating to somebody else felt like I'm too demanding of them, or they won't want me to give them something because that goes against independence. And what was happening was she was telling a story or making an assumption in her head that people didn't like to be delegated to, because it kind of interfered with her view of independence. And yet we observe that there's no evidence to that. She would go and delegate and already withdraw. As she was asking you to do something, she'd almost be taking the piece of work back off you again and taking it back on herself. And so there's a whole body of assumptions there. And again, not looking to change her, but even noticing that reaction and why does delegating feel so yucky? And what might that be about? Raise some interesting insights and curiosities. Let me just stop there, and we'll open up chat again, and Caroline can help me maybe pick out some of your questions or observations. But is this making sense to you? Do you recognize any particular aspects of your internal landscape that might be sometimes a source of that feeling of overwhelm, or any other reflections? Caroline, what's coming up in chat?
Nothing so far, Colm. Awfully shy, obviously pondering the questions you're putting to us. So we would encourage everybody to throw their thoughts into the chat feature at the bottom. One question I had about this that you've kind of brought up for me is just that this implosion of, reading materials at the moment around, discovering yourself, empowering yourself, the power within. I mean, I think it's people's capacity to be able to just take the time to reflect and let all of this information land with them, because I'm just wondering your thoughts with the people that you're working with over the last 2 years in particular, having that headspace to have clarity around this stuff that's going around their heads, circulating all the time. That's just a personal question or inquiry from me. And actually, do you know what? Sinead has come in, which is great if you want to take the two of them at the same time. But Sinead's talking about feeling of mental distance is interesting. Wonder to what extent the enforced work from home for many has exacerbated this.
Yeah, so let me take both of those, and these are just my observations, and please others jump in and give us your thoughts on this. I think the remote working, many of us may have a lot of experience about that, but I think what I see more and more is my connection with my organization has changed, because my organization isn't a thing, it's the people in it. So the fact that I can't connect with them, or I connect only with a small bunch, is definitely a factor. So that sense of belonging. I mean, I guess one of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a sense of belonging, and that's probably changed for us. I think, the other obvious area for us is the boundaries have changed. So when does work stop and when does work end? And the fact that we're working and we're child minding and we're also partly the Amazon delivery person for the people next door, and we're doing all these various things. So that ability to switch off can be hard. I know for myself, I was really disciplined when COVID first came. I went out for my 30-minute walks, and now it's just Zoom, back to back, or Teams. So how I'm doing my day, I'm not giving myself any chance to breathe at times. So I think there's an exhaustion coming through here, which is part of that outer landscape of the expectations, the culture, how we experience work has totally changed. But there's also that internal landscape of maybe telling myself, I always need to be on. And a lot of people find these coaching conversations, they almost feel like a luxury. But there's something for me fundamentally about, if we can slow down, we can actually speed up again. And it is catching breath. And we see the really powerful research on mindfulness or meditation. I think just any space that we can do to go for a walk, whatever, to give us a bit of clarity, we often come back in renewed and refreshed. So, yeah, I guess welcome others. So I see Kate talking about, I want to give both these people a big hug. Incredibly dedicated, hardworking, any way to bring a bit of fun. Oh yeah, so maybe how I'm depicting it is quite serious. There are outlets, but I guess hug might be nice. It might be nice for us, but is that going to be useful for them will be something we might explore as we go through this. But they're very human, aren't they? I think we can see many aspects of ourselves in there. What else do I see on chat? Real, talking about boundaries are blurred. Yes, okay, thanks for that. And Sinead talked about end up filling and emptying the dishwasher, washing machine instead of mindful walk. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, right? So again, part of our inner landscape is, I remember someone asking me years ago, what do you do to be still? Because there's almost a sense of, okay, this is over now. Now, there is the dishwasher and there's the washing. And there's only so many hours of drying, and always being on task. And social media is a piece of always being on as well. And so I think it's probably looking at some of our patterns of the unconscious patterns that may end having us on all the time.
Aideen had a nice observation. For person B, another value that might be held is that of competence. I can do it all. And so encouraging delegation might be perceived as a threat to that value.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
A little bit up, when we asked for the questions, they've now rushed in there. So that's at the top of the chat. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, just give me that again. Sorry, I just got.
So Aideen said, for person B, another value that might be held is that of competence / I can do it all. And so encouraging delegation might be perceived as a threat to that value.
Could be, Aideen, yeah. Funny enough, when we explore that, the person is very comfortable in kind of collaborating with more senior people, but the real, and it may well be as well, but the real kind of trigger thing is I'm imposing on them. It's almost like these are, a story of I'm treating them like servants, which isn't far from reality. I mean, we cognitively, B would know that delegating is how people progress, how they develop. One lovely process that I often encourage people to do is from a guy called Marshall Goldsmith, who would say, if you're feeling unsure about delegation, ask your team, what do you see me doing that you think you should be doing? And the question has value because we're not feeling like we're giving them stuff. We're almost inviting them to take stuff off us. I would have a hunch, be it you and your boss or people in your team, that there's probably something you're doing that they think, actually, I wouldn't mind doing that for you, or something your boss is doing. We're thinking, actually, that meeting, I could host that. That'd be good development for me. So it may be how we frame it. But yeah, maybe there is more there, Aideen. Absolutely, possibility. Great, some great comments. Just trying to flick through it all. Mark talking about losing routine from the shift as a result of COVID-19 has had a significant transition of people's thinking. Yeah, so routine. I think that is it. And person A, as he talked, and again, part of this is just trying to listen to the words and how he talked about it. He talked very much about the commute in, which was a train. And the train itself is interesting because there's a timetable. So there's time you have to be at the train station. And he would use that time to look ahead at his day. And he also found that having people in a physical space meant that he could walk by Caroline and say, hey, how's project so-and-so going? And all that routine got lost. And without maybe becoming aware of how do I replace or find new routines, it got lost, and then all that anxiety came through. So part of what we've talked about is, as I mentioned by somebody else, how do you get into the office maybe 1 or 2 days if that works for the company? But we also played with the idea of how does he develop a dashboard with his team about how does he keep up to date with things, which he is tying into his running. So I've used the running experience a lot, because one thing he does in the running is he's on Runkeeper. He tracks things. He likes to track things. So we talked about, as opposed to relying on the informal drive past with Caroline, if Caroline and the rest of the team can fill out a dashboard, he can begin to get a sense of what we talk about traffic lighting, what's green, red or yellow. For both A and B, part of the conversation, of course, is how do you start involving other people? And that's sometimes what we feel in these moments of burnout, is it can feel very, very isolating, and we can't ask for help, or we can't let anybody down. And so for both of them, it's trying to open up that space of there are other people involved where you can start helping you out in terms of doing the task or getting more clarity. Okay, great stuff on the chat. I'm going to keep going if that's okay, folks. So why are we talking about all this inner landscape? Often I'll be told, "Ooh, this is counseling. You can't go there. That's not relevant to work." And yet, I'm not asking any of us to kind of sit them down on a couch and explore their childhood. It's just the awareness that there is always an internal and external dynamic to any performance, and when there's a lack of awareness of both, I think that's where the risk is. And this lovely equation from Tim Galway, he wrote a series of books called The Inner Game of Golf and Work and Tennis. But his formula is really, I think, provocative, that performance is my potential minus all this interference, my fear of failure, my need to be liked, my worry. A number of years ago, I went on a sabbatical and came back, and my job had basically disappeared on me. That's still with me. So my desire to say yes to work isn't just about, I could tell the excuse, oh, I'm self-employed, I need to say yes, but it's all of that anxiety and scar tissue a bit. So how do I become aware of that interference? Playing tennis, how do I hear that critical voice saying, "You're not very good, are you? Are you going to double fault?" And how do I just say, "Not now, thanks"? Or put a different voice in there that says, "You know what, I'm enjoying this." There's a really interesting story I just heard on a podcast last week. It was with Willie Anderson, the ex-Irish rugby player. And Willie Anderson comes from a very unionist background up in Northern Ireland, and they were asking him about winning his Irish caps and being in Dublin and hearing the Irish national anthem, and was that a bit of a disconnect for him? And he said, "You know what? As growing up as a kid, I dreamed of playing for Ireland, and part of that dream, I knew that if I heard that song in that stadium, I had made it." It wasn't a sense of resentment or this isn't me. It was, he'd framed it in a sense of, this is actually what success looks and sounds like. And so sometimes I think, how do I tell myself I love serving, just to change the energy? So it's really relevant for us all, never mind burnout. In any of our team's performance, there may well be something else going on. And as a manager and as a friend or colleague, we're not looking to psychoanalyze them, but maybe just get them curious and raise their awareness about what might be in that inner landscape. So how do you do that? And how can we be useful versus helpful? And I separate those two things, because if we're in a conversation, I want to be helpful, my inner game is getting in the way. I really want to help you. So I may want to save you. I may want to fix you. I may want to give you the answer. That's being helpful. And yet, if I use the phrase, and we talk about this in our coaching programs, how can I be useful? I'm actually giving that back to the person. Let me know, how could I be useful for you today? I'm not going to make any assumptions. Maybe it is a hug, but maybe a hug is the last thing you need. Maybe it's to be challenged, but you'll tell me. And so for me, already reframing how we can be useful is already maybe helping me step out of some of my needs about being helpful. So what will that look like? From David's Clutter Book's definition of coaching, from what I've already talked about, at the essence of what we talk about on our programs is a good coaching conversation is about raising awareness. Talking to someone on a totally different topic last week, they had a dilemma about, do I stay in my current job or do I follow through on a new opportunity? I mean, the job market is hot right now. It's probably not an unfamiliar conversation. And they're in that dilemma, and just making them aware of, well, what are your pros and cons, and what's your list of criteria. But what also came out was one of their worries was I would be seen as disloyal if I went for the other job. And I was curious about that. I said, have you ever felt that before? And it came up that 10 years ago, after a few months in a job, they'd switched to another job. And the first manager told them how disgusted they were with them for leaving and how disloyal they were. That's funny again, that assumption and that experience has stayed with them, even though they've been 4 or 5 years with this current company. And all I'm trying to do is raise their awareness. So I had a lovely quote from John Whitmore, who's one of the first great writers on coaching and organizations. I'm only able to control that of which I am aware. That of which I am unaware controls me. Awareness empowers me. So for person A to be aware that from their running, they actually have a huge amount of discipline. Or for person A to be aware of, how do you get your team working with you on giving you more oversight if that's where your stress is? Or for person B to be aware of how you experience delegation may not be how your team experiences it. It's all just raising awareness. It's not the answer. But our belief is awareness is the agent of change. If I'm aware of something, if right now I'm aware of a dried throat, I have some options. I have an option of keep going, or I can reach for this glass of water and have that need met. It gives me options. When we have awareness, we have choices. And sometimes that's the greatest support we can offer someone, is just to help them realize how could they see some more perspectives of this topic, so that they have more choices to make, and the possibility that their choices will be the best ones, as opposed to me giving them the choice. What can you do then to raise someone's awareness? And please, again, use chat to jump in and share any things that you do. But we've already shared it a bit when we asked you, how could we help person A and B, being present and available. And I think as managers and leaders, this has been hard for us, right? Everything we talked about in terms of disconnection from job, from emptying the dishwasher, being always on, it's getting harder and harder for us to be present virtually, because it's less informal. You know, someone has to almost book a Zoom call. And I've rediscovered a thing called the telephone recently. You know, pick up and call someone. It sounds so ridiculous, but I probably haven't used my phone in months that way. But just hoping to catch someone and have an informal conversation. So how can I be present and available? And we've already talked about real listening, but how do I really listen? Not while I'm shopping on Amazon for books or getting distracted, but how do I really listen for what is being said? Who listens to you? Is it at home and work? Who really listens and doesn't interrupt or try and fix it for you? Who really listens to you? And who do you really listen to? How can we do that to the best of our abilities with all the distractions? And it's not just listening, but as we listen, the power of summarizing and paraphrasing back. So for both A and B, as they said things, it wasn't my ability to see what's going on. It's me sharing back. Did you notice that you called it that person's role? Did you I hear how important the routine of getting up at a particular time, getting the train. Did I get that right? How could you replicate that? I'm holding up the mirror all the time. Person B, I just noticed your facial expressions when you talk about delegating. It looked like you just swallowed a hot chili or something. You know, what's going on there? How do I not judge? No, we're all good, honest people trying to do the best we can. How to give some feedback? Maybe if you're close to someone, how do you let them know that you've got some maybe concerns about how long they're online, or how they might be different than they were a few months ago? And not asking, how can you be useful? Some other ideas, which may be in some of our comfort zones and may not be in others, but how do we invite them to be curious about the inner landscape? So how would I even do that? Well, I could talk about, hey, you know, I heard about this idea of everything has external and internal. What do you make of that? I think one way in there is sometimes asking the question, how are you feeling? It's not a question we all like or respond to, but using the F word in organizations could be a huge benefit. How are you feeling as you tell me what's going on? What are you experiencing now as you say it? I'm always curious that question. Have you been here before? So has A potentially ever experienced something similar? It may not be the same, but something similar. How did you get through that? What did you learn from that? Has B ever found herself doing two roles before? How did she get through it? And there's something about staying in the here and now. And as you share this with me, what's going on for you now? Because that's where the information is, or what's going on for me as I listen to you. I might say, I just want to say how much I admire your success, or I really can notice how this is tough for you. But how do we stay in the conversation and not try and go into the future too fast? So before we look at how people change, let's just have a quick look at chat, Caroline. Is there anything jumping out? So Aoife talking about raising awareness, ask for clarification on the words used. Yeah, lovely. Ask them how would their colleagues perceive things. Lovely, Aoife. So again, how do we bring in some of that external perspective? Anne is asking, is interference always internal? Well, there is that outer landscape. But in our understanding, I mean, there are organizational contexts that if I go back to performance equals potential minus interference, maybe my lack of leadership from my manager or lack of resources, they will interfere with that. But I guess in our context, a lot or as much of the interference can come within my own head. And it is that idea of a lot of it can be internal. So we've been talking a bit about what we could do. We can help raise their awareness, be available, listen, ask questions, ask how they are, raise their awareness in different perspectives, get them thinking about what they've done in the past, if they felt something similar. But coaching involves two people. I can't just do it to somebody. So how do people change? And there's a great piece of research from Petrashka, and a book called Changing for Good. And he talks about we go through very consistent stages when any of us try to self-change. And some of these will be very familiar. We all know what preparation and action looks like. In organizations, we often, and in life, be it diets, we don't talk a lot about maintenance, but that's a key stage. But let me look at the first two. And the first two are key. Every stage is equally important. And in a way, they're very pertinent to this conversation. So pre-contemplation is a stage in change when it's not that I don't know what the answers are, I don't even know there's a problem, or I'm not willing to admit there's a problem. So think about yourself, change you've made, or think about someone in your life, professionally or privately, and there may be clear to many others what they might need to do differently or something that's not serving them well, and yet they can't hear it. And often that's a defense mechanism. We will often deny that there's an issue, or we'll project, I'm not working crazy hours, it's the organization's fault. And we stay in pre-contemplation because change is anxious. If I have to admit I need to change, that raises change of identity, but it also raises the possibility that I might fail in my change. So many of us will fight hard to stay in pre-contemplation. And then the stage of contemplation is not a commitment to action, but even just accepting there's something here, and how do I look at the cost benefits? And when we look at A and B, I guess one of the things is A very much came in that contemplation preparation stage. He was the one who instigated the idea of working with a coach. That's a very different relationship than working with someone in pre-contemplation, where maybe others are seeing the worrying signs and the person is maybe resisting or not seeing it. So there is something about we can only maybe work with people as they move into some level of contemplation of, yeah, something here isn't quite the way I want it to be, or I want something to be different. Person B, again, burnout hasn't achieved yet, but I noticed from our work together is she is getting more open to contemplating, and she's using the coaching not for practical tips and tricks, but to unearth some of these drivers, because she's curious about how do I scale and change my leadership. So she's also in that contemplative space. So it is hard when someone is pre-contemplation. It's hard when we go and offer some support or help. It may not always be well received. How do any of us get out of pre-contemplation? It could be giving them feedback. It could be helping them see what better looks like, which is one of the first observations on chat. It could be getting somebody else to maybe, not just you, give the observation that, gee, you know, there's a lot of hours being worked here, or you don't quite see yourself, or whatever that is. So the risk with pre-contemplation is it can often be perceived as nagging. And I don't know about you, but when I get nagged, I dig in. But knowing that it's human to stay in pre-contemplation, we just need to encourage them to even explore the contemplation space. Okay, I'm coming close to the end of our piece. That's a real quick thing. I mean, I've been talking about two individuals. I just want to highlight that I think teams can experience burnout as well. And that sense of just running around like hell's chickens. And one of the reasons, this is a model from Peter Hawkins, is when we look at value creating teams, they can often, teams that are burning out, they might be very clear on their goals and objectives. That's the left-hand top box. But what they've never really done is align them with their stakeholders. So this idea of commissioning. A number of teams I work with will tell me, oh yeah, here's our KPIs, here's our purpose. And I say, well, have you spoken to your stakeholders about this? Do they agree? And there's often that total disconnect. So again, and having an ongoing connection with stakeholders to manage demands. Teams that I see in a huge spin are often ones who think they have to say yes to everything, and they keep running around in order to please the stakeholders or their perception, but they never really engage. And even as a team, they don't have the conversation about how do we prioritize all these asks. So if it makes sense to you, you might be experiencing a team that's running around, and what's going on is almost, if we look at this model, you know, a good framework for any of us to learn as individuals or as teams is we act, we review, we think it through, and then we plan, and then we act. It's called the learning cycle. And teams often have shortcuts. So I see some teams where they act and they review and they do a lot of post-mortemizing, but they never actually think it through and plan to do anything differently. They're just stuck in that grid, or the firefighting grid, where teams plan, they act, they plan, they act. And there's no time, there's never enough time, they tell me, to stop and review and ask what's working well, what do our stakeholders or customers think? They don't bring in the reviewing and thinking. So they're just stuck on this firefighting. So again, it might be a thought about for your team. Does your team ever get the chance to down tools and stop and ask the question, even stop, start, continue? What do we want to continue doing? What do we want to stop doing? What do we want to start doing? Okay, I'm conscious of time, and we're near the top of the hour. Let's have a quick look, Caroline, okay, if it's okay, at some questions, and then I'll hand over to you to wrap us up. So Caroline was asking, how long should one stay in pre-contemplation? Is there a timeline? And is this where most of the work is done? Karen, for any of these stages, those 5 stages, they can all, I know I probably have stayed in contemplation for some things for years on end. So there's a sense of somebody needs to nudge me out. But yeah, pre-contemplation can be, there's no one answer to that. It could be, you know, you think of New Year's Eve and we all decide to join a gym. There's no pre-contemplation. We just go from contemplation to join the gym, and then the gyms are empty in March. So it really varies. It may depend on how deep the work is. Eve, for sharing the idea of raising awareness. I think we just covered that. Let me see if there's anything else in chat before I hand over to Caroline. Would someone in pre-contemplation look for help? Possibly not. And they, as Marielle, they may even find the approach might be challenging. But I think it's trying to encourage, it's trying to say, maybe there's another perspective here, or what does better look like? So it can be hard to get someone out of that space. Okay, Caroline, I'm going to hand over to you, and I think I'm just going to move the slides on for us to wrap up.
Brilliant, thank you. Great. Well, look, I'm also conscious of time, and I know that people will have other calls to do at the top of the hour. You know, first of all, just to say thank you to Colm for a really enlightening webinar, especially on Monday. So I feel like that everybody that was on the call, and there was over 80 of us together this morning, can do something different. And, you know, you asked, there was a couple of calls to action about being curious, and also, you know, what conversation you could have, or which conversation you could have this week and do it differently. So certainly I think each and every one of us could take that simple instruction on board and try it. And I do love the other F word because that's like my vocabulary. So let me just tell you very briefly about what we're doing at Smurfit Executive Development around the coaching theme. So, those of you that are familiar with what we do, our programs span everything from strategy, coaching, governance, sales, leadership, but we're just kind of zoning in on coaching this morning. So we have a diploma in business and executive coaching. We also then have a diploma that moves on to look at the psychological dimensions of coaching. It's called the Advanced Business and Executive Coaching Program. And then Colm himself created a program in team coaching back in 2017, if my memory serves me correctly. And those three programs added together will be an award. It's the MSc in Business and Executive Coaching, but they're all standalone diplomas. So that's what we have in our kind of open enrollment suite, where you sign up as an individual. That's not to say we do a huge amount of work across organizations, both accredited and not for credit, in person, online. So we have a number of clients that would ask us to look at programs and factor in coaching throughout the program. And then coming soon, so I'm delighted that we will be announcing details shortly about a program called Coaching for Impact at Work. Again, that can be an in-person program, or it can be delivered directly to an organization, both in person and online. So lots to talk to you about. And again, all you need to do is reach out to myself and my colleagues, Leah and Maria, and we can talk to you about all those. If you want to move the slide on, Colm, I'll give a very whistle-stop tour of the coaching program. So this is just some very top-line information. The Diploma in Business and Executive Coaching typically runs twice a year. The next intake will be March 2022. So class size of 24, very intimate, and great ratio between the coach practice tutors, the coach faculty leads, and participants in the classroom. It's a 30 credit diploma program. As I said, it feeds into the MSc or as a standalone product. It's delivered across 16 days, typically over 12 months, and it's a mix of 2 and 3 day workshops. The price point there, you'll see, is just over €13,000, paid in installments throughout the lifetime of the program. And also there's a 5% discount for those that have a UCD business qualification already. After that, it'll be, I just see a question coming in, what's the second intake? So it'll be October 2022 after March. Colm, if you wanted to slide it on there.
I might just put out some of the quotes from our, I mean, it's interesting, Linda talks about this idea of it goes below the surface. So again, some things we've talked about, we will help you learn those skills. David Carson, from my old stomping ground of Deloitte's, again, this idea of helping you hold that space for people to kind of engage in these conversations being key. And maybe, Caroline, the last slide for people is just to give them a heads up of the rest of this week. Very
much so. So look, this is a week-long webinar series just to give you a taste and flavor of what we're doing and the type of faculty and practitioners that are working with us and across the topics that are coming up for people at the moment. So as a follow-up, Leah, my colleague, will send out a recording of this later on today. She'll send you links to the rest of the webinars that are happening this week. But as I said, anything that's cropping up for you as a result of this webinar, reach out to us. We can connect you with Colm. We can connect you with other faculty within our programs. We'd love to stay in touch with you. So that's really it for a Monday, a great start to the week. Thank you again, Colm, on behalf of everybody in SDB, and Mario, who's behind the scenes there doing all the technical wizardry. So that all went very smoothly. So have a great rest of the week, and we hopefully might see some of you tomorrow with Dr. Grode Hardy. So yep, thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.